We are moving now to the next session where we are going to have interviews, a discussion with a very renowned journalist and person who has had a lot of experience working in the region. We're going to have an interview with the journalist and author Martin Plaut, who has highlighted a lot about the suffering of the people of Tigray and especially the movement of Eritrean soldiers in Tigray. This interview is going to be facilitated by Mariam Basajja, who is a researcher and initiator of African Women Campaign Against Sexual Violence. Mariam, you're welcome. Martin, you're welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Reginald, for the introduction. So I guess I'll go straight to the interview. So Martin, we know that you are an expert on the Horn and that you follow the situation in Tigray very closely. Having heard these testimonies, what is your first reaction?
Well, I must say, particularly as a man, just how appalling it is when you hear the testimony, particularly against the women. I mean, you know, that is just, I find it horrifying. I can't imagine how anybody can possibly still consider themselves human if they treat a woman in that way. I mean, I have seen some of the videos of the treatment of women that were described there, and they are absolutely horrifying, just appalling. And there's nothing that no mitigation that you can say about it whatsoever. I mean, the other elements are, of course, tragic and very familiar, but I think that this war has been absolutely, characterized by those appalling attacks on girls and women. And, particularly, in front of their families. These are traditional societies. I mean, it is designed to not just to inflict damage on the women, which is, of course, awful, but on the entire community, on their whole family is once it's happened like that. I mean, I just don't know what to say. I really don't know what to say. I'm speechless.
Well, I completely agree with you on that one. It's absolutely appalling and terrifying. So yesterday the Ethiopian government announced a unilateral ceasefire. The Ethiopian government said that this was to allow the farmers to plant and avoid a famine. Can you tell us what happened and what the current situation is in Tigray?
Well, I must say I'm pretty skeptical about the announcement by the Ethiopian government that there is a unilateral ceasefire. I mean, what does it mean? I mean, can you imagine? Just take another example. Can you imagine if the German army and Hitler had announced a unilateral ceasefire after being defeated in the Battle of Stalingrad? In the middle of the Second World War? I mean, people would have said, what are you talking about? You're still occupying vast areas of what was then the Soviet Union. And surely we should have the same kind of reaction to this. You cannot have the aggressor, and, quite frankly, there's no doubt about who the aggressor was. The people who attacked Tigray, there were three armies. There were the Ethiopians, the Eritreans, there were Somali troops, and there were the Amhara militia. And they launched a war against Tigray. You can't then receive a setback, and let's be clear, this is not the end of the war. I mean, losing Mekelle and being driven out of other areas and other towns, and it seems that other towns have fallen, is a huge setback particularly to the Prime Minister Abiy, the Ethiopian leader, and to President Isaias. but it is not the end of this war. And they can't just suddenly say, oh, well, sorry, big mistake, unilateral ceasefire. Of course, any ceasefire is to be welcomed in a sense, but, they are not the ones that can call it. What is required is opening negotiations. You can't have, one side just declaring a ceasefire without talks. Talk first, the guns can fall silent, then the things can be made better. But you can't do it just unilaterally.
And the testimonies of sexual violence committed by Eritrean troops against the women and the girls in Tigray show such an imaginable cruelty. Can you comment on that?
It's very difficult to know what to say about it. I mean, what it tells me is that the young men who are inflicting this on these women have been brutalized. That they come out of a society that has been brutalized by many factors, but by two in particular. First of all, let us not forget that between 1961 and 1991, the Eritrean people fought an absolutely heroic war of independence. And I mean, nothing can ever take away from the extraordinary heroism that they showed when they were fighting for their country, and which was then established de facto in 1991 and then de jure in 1993. But then wounds of those wars, in which so many tens of thousands of people died, gave up their lives, never healed, partly because there was no attempt to heal it afterwards, but there was no program to do that. You then got the border war of 1998-2000, which was fought with the Ethiopians. Again, perhaps 100,000 people died in that war. Another set of appalling suffering, which people have to internalize. But since then, you have this system of national conscription in which young people have to go into the Eritrean military at the end of their school career. The only thing that will stop you is if you become pregnant, you go and become a mother, then you can be taken out of it. But apart from that, you are in national services called permanently. So once you're in permanent national service you can be released, but it's entirely up to your commander and the leaders of the Eritrean government. Once you're in there, you are in absolute control of those officers. They can do what they like with you. Many of the girls are sexually abused. Some of the boys and men are, beaten savagely. If they protest, they are under military rules, so they can be, anything can happen to them. They could be shot. Now, you have all of these events have, as I say, brutalized young people, particularly young boys, over a long, long period. We have now from 1961 through to today. I mean, I don't know what that is, 50, 60 years. And people have been suffering from that. And the boys are now sent into battle. They are told, they are instructed that the Tigrayans are their enemy, the enemy of their country, that they have done appalling things to their country. And if it wasn't for the Tigrayans, there wouldn't be any problems in Eritrea, which of course is complete nonsense. But with that background and that kind of indoctrination and no discipline from the officers, in fact, I mean, I can't prove, of course, that these orders come from above, but the overall system is in place because of President Isaias. And he runs the country without any kind of let or hindrance. He's never been elected. There's no constitution. There's no parliament. There's no newspaper is independent. Nothing. So he can do exactly what he likes. What you see on the battlefield is what he wanted to happen. Now, he has total responsibility for what those young boys are doing, both for the way they're being treated, the way they're being brought up, and the way they are sent into battle, as your testimonies showed, to die. Now, can you imagine, in those circumstances, what do you think they're going to do? You put them in front of young women, and they think, this is my one chance. And what they do is appalling. So that's all I can't really enlarge on that.
Well, you actually broadly explained on that really well. It's quite appalling indeed. So from the testimonies, we understand that the Eritrean troops came to abduct Eritrean refugees protected in the camps in Tigray and forced them to participate in the war in Tigray as part of the Eritrean army. Does this constitute a war crime?
Look, I'm not a lawyer. I'm a journalist. I'm not going to, start telling you what is or isn't a war crime. And I think that would be beyond my remit. But, you have to ask yourself, why was President Isaias so determined to pick up the people there? Because there were nearly 100,000 Eritreans who had fled mainly from the national conscription system and the national service across the border. Some had gone to Sudan, but many had gone to Eritrea, to Tigray, crossed into Ethiopia. And they were extraordinarily warmly received by the people of Tigray, because let's not forget that certainly the Highlanders are very similar. They speak similar languages, they both are, most of them are Orthodox Christians. So there is a genuine sense of warmth and sharing, which, is one of the great testimonies to the people of these countries, that what the little they have, they share. I mean, anyone who's been to Africa knows this, that people are enormously generous and welcoming. And so, they took them in, they housed them, the UNHCR helped them, they were in protection. But for President Isaias, they were like a constant jab in his side with a stick. He saw them as a total insult that these people had fled from his country, which he thought was, the best possible country that there could possibly be, and he was running it the right way. And how dare they run away and seek refuge elsewhere? More than that, he also thought maybe one day they will organize themselves and come back and fight me. And there was the possibility of guerrilla warfare from Tigray into Eritrea, which never really happened. There were a few incidents, but it wasn't a major event. That, I think, is one thing that he feared. So for him, wrapping up the camps, attacking them, abducting the people, sending them back into the army, from which many of them, of course, had escaped. Many of them had military training. So when he was short of troops, so great opportunity. And he picked up the two northern camps of Hitsats and Shemelba were completely cleared out, destroyed. And the people were, as the UNHCR put it, refooled. It's the sort of technical term for being forced back to Eritrea against your will. Some of them were in prison. Some of them were put into the army and sent back in to fight. And we heard that from some of the testimonies. Some of the others fled into to the southern camps. Others then fled to Addis Ababa, where again they were threatened, harassed, partly by the Ethiopian security forces, but also by, and this is something people forget, they were also harassed by Eritrean security forces who have been inside Addis Ababa for a long time. President Isaias has a very long reach, and he has reached not just into Tigray, but into Addis Ababa. He has got feelers and people who work for him in Nairobi. He's got people in South Sudan. He has a long reach. In fact, you can be attacked by his supporters anywhere in the world. And the diaspora certainly suffers from huge abuses and threats. They have to pay out money to the Eritrean government to keep it going. That's one of their main sources. I myself have been attacked here in London by an Eritrean supporter, who I'm sure was told to do it by the regime. Of course, I can't prove it. But that is the most likely reason why he decided to chuck all sorts of rubbish all over me. And he was found guilty in a court of doing it. So this is why President Isaias is not the sort of person who just leaves things as they are. He is determined to control life inside Eritrea and outside Eritrea as far as he possibly can, and certainly across the Horn of Africa.
That is quite something. And from the testimonies, we also learned that the Eritrean soldiers were forced to fight in Tigray, well, like you've also mentioned, and the soldiers included prisoners. Some people had just been released after more than 10 years in prison, and the deployment also included minors. It is part of an indefinite national service in Eritrea. Can we say that this is a crime against humanity? And why would you answer that? Yeah.
Well, again, I mean, I'm not a lawyer, so I can't really answer whether it is or isn't a crime. But the UN has determined, after a very lengthy process and careful scrutiny of the situation in Eritrea, that indeed there is what amounts to slavery, and that slavery is indeed a crime. So we can say for sure that after all the testimonies that have been, and there's hundreds of pages that have been collected, we can be sure that it is a crime, not because I say it, because I'm not in a position to say it, but because the United Nations itself has given that determination.
Last week, 3 workers from MSF were killed in Tigray, and more than 10 aid workers have been killed, including in the refugee camps by the Eritrean troops. In your opinion, has Eritrea violated the international humanitarian law through its actions in Tigray?
Again, I'm not a lawyer, so I can't really answer the legal question. But I think one of the things people really need to know is, why is it that the Eritreans are so determined to be involved in this process? What is it that drives President Isaias in particular to try to crack the Tigrayans? Because that is what's behind all of these activities, including the killing of the aid workers. And I think one of the answers to that is strategic, because there was an interesting interview which Prime Minister Abiy gave very recently, in which he made it clear that the only reason, in his view, that the Tigrayans had in the terrible famine of 1984-85, why had they become so strong, was because the aid agencies gave support and assistance to the Tigrayans, often through Sudan. And he said, we will never allow that to happen, never. And that was one of the things that has been driving him to say, we will not allow aid in. That's one of the reasons why he's doing it, because he thinks it will only strengthen the Tigrayans. But if I may, I'll have a short diversion. Let me go back a few years to that 84-85 famine, because there is something there that happened there which explains a huge amount about the relationship between the Eritreans and the Tigrayans. Not the people, but the organizations that led them, the Eritrean People's Liberation Front, or EPLF, and the TPLF, or Tigrayan People's Liberation Front. The two organizations worked pretty closely together from the mid-1970s. The Eritreans gave some military training to the Tigrayans, and some people even went over and fought alongside the Tigrayans. But in a number of ways, they were very, very different organizations. So, I mean, to take one specific example, The Tigrayans always said, do not hold territory, be a guerrilla campaign. The Eritreans said, no, we will hang on to territory close to the border with Sudan. It's our back door. We need to control that. And they held the town of Nakfa throughout 30 years of fighting. It's an extraordinary achievement. But there were also political issues. So, for example, the Tigrayans at that time were Maoists. In fact, they were such strong Maoists that they thought that Albania was the way forward. I mean, it was a strange set of ideas that they had, but that was what they believed. The Eritreans thought they were completely wrong. The Tigrayans attacked the Eritreans for being undemocratic because they refused to endorse a system which would allow nationalities to have independence if they wish to have it. The sort of system of ethnic federalism, which the Tigrayans instituted in Ethiopia after they took power in 1991. These matters came to a head in the 84-85 famine. It became so severe that the Eritreans closed the road from Sudan into Tigray, along which all the aid was flowing into the liberated areas that the TPLF were holding. Now you can imagine, in the middle of a famine, to close that road, for the Eritreans to do that, how furious they were with the Eritreans, and how furious the Eritreans were that this had been done to them. The Tigrayans reacted extraordinarily. They built a new road all the way from Tigray into Sudan, and they marched 100,000, maybe 200,000 people out of Tigray because they couldn't feed them in the fields. Something like 13,000 men and women, and particularly children, died along that route. It was described by senior members of the Tigrayans as a savage act. I mean, you can only agree. But it gives you an idea of what the bitterness, the depth of bitterness. This is never discussed. It never comes to the fore. But if you want to understand what goes into this terrible animosity and hatred between the leaderships of the EPLF and TPLF, you have to go back to these kind of periods. And that, I think, begins to, when you see that and you understand why the refugee camps, the potential threat they held up for President Isaias, you begin to understand why it was that he was prepared to take such extreme measures against the Tigrayans. I'm sorry it's a bit of a diversion, but it sort of explains the background to the issues that are driving the current war, which frankly is tearing the whole of the Horn of Africa apart.
Okay, thank you for that. Well, it is obvious that the Eritrean government, Isaias, is against all humanitarian rights. Why is the international community not doing anything about it?
Well, it's not quite true to say the international community is doing nothing about it. There has been action by the European Union. They have put out a lot of statements. So have President Biden in the United States, and his team have really worked very hard on this. They've had a special envoy going out there who's met with not just the Eritreans and Ethiopians, but also many of the Arab countries, and they have tried to find a way of mediating between all of this. The African Union appointed 3 senior mediators, including Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, the former president of Liberia, and so they tried. The problem was twofold. First of all, the African Union initiative, which came right at the beginning of the war and could have solved the problem, was blocked by Prime Minister Abiy. He basically said, this is a law and order situation inside our country. These people are terrorists. We're not speaking to them. We're going to crush them. So that was the end of that. And they had to go home. Secondly, in the UN Security Council, and this is one of the great problems for the Security Council, the Chinese and the Russians will always block any kind of action against that they don't approve of. And they are basically the backstop for the Ethiopians and the Eritreans in all of this. They are not allowing any of this to take place. So all initiatives and discussions have been blocked by them. Any discussions that have happened have been taken off agenda under any other business. Well, you can't make a proper decision in that kind of way. Now, there is supposedly another attempt to hold a proper debate in the Security Council today, I believe, although I stand to be corrected. Maybe the Russians and the Chinese will move, but I'm not very hopeful. So that is what has blocked those are the blockages.
Okay, and what do you think are the chances of those responsible for the mass rapes and other atrocities? What are the chances of holding those perpetrators accountable in the international criminal courts?
Reference to the international criminal courts, and again, I'm a journalist and not a lawyer, but as I understand it, the reference to the ICC can only happen in two different ways. Either because a court in a country can't hear a particular issue, or it's been exhausted. So you have to take it through the domestic the courts. The only other way of taking something to the International Criminal Court is through the UN Security Council. The Security Council has the right itself to refer it. But there again, you come up against the Russian and the Chinese veto. So I don't know how you get around that. The African Union Court on Human and People's Rights has begun hearing the situation. Unfortunately, they have three real problems. One, they're in Gambia, which is a long way from where it's all happening. They're not in Addis Ababa, at the heart of the UN, of the African Union. Secondly, they are, their opinions, while very useful, don't carry much weight. I mean, one just got to be honest about it. They try hard, but they haven't really been. The African leaders don't take them very, very seriously, and if the African leaders don't take them seriously, well, then what's the point? I think those are some obstacles they have in getting the evidence. There is, of course, also supposedly an independent UN investigation into the human rights abuses, which is working with the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission. The UN's been criticized for setting it up in that way because the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission is not seen as entirely independent as in the way that it should be. How far they've got, I don't know. They haven't made any kind of findings. Presumably they are accumulating evidence, as is Amnesty International, as is Human Rights Watch. So let's hope that all that information can be gathered. But even if it is gathered, who is going to prosecute? That is the big problem.
Good question. Do you think the intentions of the Eritreans' involvement in Tigray are genocidal?
When all of this started, I was very resistant to the idea that they were genocidal because, the word genocide should be used extremely sparingly. There are, as far as I know, only 3 examples of genocide. There is the attempt by the Turks to eliminate the Armenians. There is the attempt by the Hutu to eliminate the Tutsi in Rwanda. And there was the attempt by the Nazis to eliminate the Jewish people in the Holocaust. So those are the 3 that I think are really, really well founded. so I was very resistant about using that word. I think it's got to be kept. You know, people throw it around as if it's you know, rice. You've got to be really careful about using a word like that unless you are absolutely sure. I must say that gradually over a period of time, as it became clear that the both Eritrea and Ethiopia were purposefully blocking the aid convoys coming into areas that were under their control. And let me just take one specific example. If you look at the area right up on the north with Eritrea, which are in Irob, the Eritreans had complete control and have done so for months. They could easily have supplied it. I know for a fact that the international community, the World Food Programme, have been talking to the Eritreans and saying, look, can we use your ports? Can we put aid convoys through there? And that has not been allowed. That has been blocked. Now, when you know people are in such dire hunger and you know that blocking it will lead to a famine in which people will starve, and you know, as the UN, USAID said only last week, that 900,000 people are now on the edge of starvation. And these kind of figures have been known for a long time. It's been absolutely clear. When you know this, then when you stop the aid going in, then I think it is, shall we say, if it's not a genocide, it is genocidal. It's genocidal activity. You are trying to kill the entire population. And I think that you have to, in the end, accept that that is possibly what is going on. And that is just, you know, beyond description. It's awful.
Really awful. But do you think that Africa has done enough to prevent the innocent killings and the rape of the civilians in Tigray?
No. I mean, in one word, no, absolutely not. You know, many years ago, President Museveni of Uganda, when he came to power after a terrible war that he fought against Obote and Amin and God knows who else, you know, he described the OAU, as it then was the Organization of African Unity, as a club of dictators. And I'm afraid, you know, even if they're not all dictators anymore, they're a club. They don't give a damn.
Oh, that's really sad.
Well, I would love to be wrong.
Well, I honestly don't disagree, so yeah. But well, I understand there'll be a session in the UN Security Council on Tigray. Should the UN Security Council discuss the Eritrean involvement in Tigray?
I think that they should do anything that they can to end this ghastly war. I mean, you know, the Eritrean involvement is really important. And let me just go back to before the war broke out. I mean, you did run through this in some of your testimonies and some of the evidence. But let me just run through what happened. There was a gradual build-up from 1998 when the peace was signed with Prime Minister Abiy, which was fantastic and was welcomed by everybody. I was delighted that there was going to be a proper peace between Eritrea and Ethiopia. But it soon became clear that President Isaias had held separate meetings with his own senior leadership before this took place, in which he told them, and I don't have the exact terms of what he said, but as I understand it, what he said in general was something like this. We in Eritrea are a small country. We can't possibly run our very long coastline on the Red Sea, which is very important. And we've got lots of other military organizations from the Chinese, the Americans, the French, the Indians all had bases in Djibouti. We can't ensure the security of our country. We need help. And so he basically suggested that they should move towards some kind of federal structure with Ethiopia, and this which would allow the Ethiopian Navy to reestablish its base, which was at Massawa for many, many years. I mean, that's where it was traditionally, and of course ended when the independence of Eritrea came about. And he basically set out a plan which would involve the whole of the Horn of Africa. And this was endorsed by his colleagues. Well, they always endorse what he says. And from then on, you got a series of meetings between Isaias and Abiy, and then bringing in the Somali president, Farmajo. So the three of them were united. And there's one wonderful cartoon which shows this. And they're pictures of them together agreeing what they're going to do. As you pointed out, there was then meetings in which President Isaias visited the military base, the Air Force base in Ethiopia, and Prime Minister Abiy visited Sawa, the main training base for Eritrea. Never happened before. And this was all only weeks before the war broke out. So it was pretty clear. They were planning this war from a long time back. The Tigrayans then took defensive measures. They blocked the removal of heavy artillery from the Northern Command, which is in Tigray. It's the most powerful command of the Ethiopian army. And they refused to accept a new chief of staff for the Northern Command, who was sent from Addis Ababa, and the Tigrayans sent him on a plane back home. You can imagine this didn't go down very well with Prime Minister Abiy. And so tension was gradually ratcheting up. And then there was, on the night of the 3rd and the 4th of November, there were events which are still not absolutely clear, in which there was a confrontation in the Northern Command headquarters in Mekelle. There are different versions of what took place, but some people say that the Tigrayans offered anyone who was there to come over to them if they wanted to, and many of them did, and they were going to release the rest and send them home through the International Red Cross. Some resisted, there was a firefight, and they were suppressed. And as I understand it, many were taken prisoner and were then eventually sent home. Other from the Northern Command who were further north crossed into Eritrea and then were mobilized again to fight in the war, in the invasion that took place afterwards, in which they invaded Tigray. So it's a long and a complicated relationship, but I think you can't see this war without understanding that President Isaias is really the guiding mind behind it. He is the one who has for years and years attempted to come to a position in which he controls the whole of the Horn of Africa. I mean, it may seem bizarre that a small country like Eritrea, which has, nobody knows how many people, they've not had a census in living memory, but say 5 million people for argument's sake. And you have a country like Ethiopia with more than 100 million people. And yet this small country like Eritrea thinks it can kind of, control the whole of the Horn of Africa. But believe me, that is what President Isaias thinks. And he plots and he schemes, and he, as I said, he has his agents across the Horn of Africa. He has spies in every village in Eritrea. He releases disinformation. I mean, you described in the testimony the way in which front organizations have been established, even in the United States, to try and put out the kind of disinformation that appears real. That is what he does. That is how he operates. That's how he's done it for many, many years, and he will continue to do so.
And what do you think is going to be the relationship between the people of Eritrea and Ethiopia, taking into consideration that many of the Eritreans oppose the interference of Eritrea in the internal affairs of Ethiopia and attended all the demonstrations in support of the people of Tigray? would the UN revive its commission that reported that the crime against humanity has been committed in Eritrea?
Well, that commission was followed by a special rapporteur on human rights in Eritrea who built on what had been found. I don't think there's really a need to revisit the question of what are the internal crimes, but there's no reason why the process that led to the finding that the national service was indeed a crime of slave-like conditions. There's no reason why that commission couldn't be revived to look at the crimes that are being committed in Tigray. That could certainly be done. And let's not forget, the UN has, at the end of the appalling border war between Ethiopia and Eritrea that ended in 2000, they sent a peacekeeping force to all the way along the border to try and maintain peace. And they did a good job until the Eritreans made their position absolutely impossible. So, the UN has in the past sent peacekeepers in, but the first thing we have to do is to have talks. Talks between the Tigrayans and the Ethiopian government have to be held. The Eritrean troops must withdraw. Humanitarian aid must be allowed to flow not just into Tigray, but through the ports of Eritrea and places like Djibouti and Sudan. We have to use all the means possible to get the aid into Tigray. We cannot allow 900,000 people to die. During the 84-85 famine, between 400,000 and 500,000 people died. Some people say as many as 1 million. I think that's an exaggeration. But can you imagine, even if we take 400,000 people, it would be absolutely atrocious if on our watch, in our lifetimes, we allowed that many people to die of hunger and starvation when we know about it. We've known about it for months. So there's a lot that can be done, but people need to act now. There is no time to waste.
And what moves would you advise the people to do in order to bring all these people in front of the ICC so that they can be accountable for their actions? What moves would you recommend?
Well, it's going to take a lot, because it's going to take. Frankly, I think the only way it would happen would be if the Security Council sanctioned it. But even then, how are you going to get the leader of a country, Prime Minister Abiy or President Isaias, how are you going to get them there? Who's going to go and send and arrest them? The United Nations does not have an army. I mean, it's one thing that people always make a mistake about. The UN has no troops. It borrows troops from other countries for particular missions. So they have no army they can draw upon. So there's nobody who can actually enforce it. So to be honest with you, I think it's a bit of a dead end. But I think there's something that we should actually think about a little bit, which is the actual scale of what has happened yesterday. And it really is an extraordinary event, because, it was only 8 months ago when the Tigrayans left Mekelle completely broken as far as I was concerned. I just could not see how they were going to reform when they'd been attacked by 3 countries and armed militia from the Amhara. I thought that, they would continue a guerrilla campaign, but to be in a position where, 10 days ago, they launched this operation. They have taken back huge chunks of their territory, if not almost the whole of Tigray. They've taken back their capital. They've taken back cities. They say they have killed 28,000 enemy troops and captured 6,000. That is an extraordinary achievement. And, I think if you look back at what has happened, I would suggest there are 2 comparators. One is the collapse of the French in what was called Indochina, which was Vietnam, in 1954, which was the fall of Dien Bien Phu to the Viet Cong. an amazing achievement. But the other one, the Eritreans should not have forgotten. It was the Battle of Alphabet, which took place from the 17th to the 20th of March, 1988, when the Eritrean forces faced 20,000 extremely well-armed Ethiopian troops who were supported by the Russians, the Soviets at the time, and had heavy equipment and guns. And they trapped them in a valley, and they annihilated them. It was an extraordinary feat. And what is so amazing is that the Eritreans, or the Eritrean leadership, not the Eritreans, the Eritrean leadership, President Isaias has sort of forgotten what you can do as a guerrilla force when you have your backs to the wall, when you have nothing to lose and your country to gain. And that is one of the great problems that he kind of forgot his own history and what he himself had participated in when he tried to crush the Tigrayans. The big question now is where all this goes. I mean, as I say, I've suggested you need talks, but talks about what? I mean, is Tigray going to be reintegrated into Ethiopia? Is it going to try and form a separate country? These are all questions I can't possibly begin to answer. And it's not for me to even speculate. This is something that the people of the Horn of Africa will have to discuss. But the first move has to be open the talks, lift the ban on the TPLF, which suggests that they are that they are terrorists, and open the talks, start talking. As Winston Churchill, the famous British leader, said, jaw is better than a war.
And do you think a ceasefire can happen without SS agreeing to it?
No, not really. I mean, this has to be this is why it has to be negotiated. You can't possibly have one bit of the war saying there's a ceasefire when the rest hasn't agreed. Not possible. There has to be agreement between all the parties to the conflict, and everybody has to agree on what terms you have that ceasefire. Then you can have a deal.
And do you think there's any truth in the claim that members of the UNSC, Kenya, Tunisia, and Nigeria are also blocked from any action on Tigray?
Sorry, just explain that again.
Is there any truth in the claim that members of the UNSC, in Kenya, Tunisia, and Nigeria have been blocked from doing anything or any action on Tigray?
So that there are members of the Security Council who are being prevented from participating. It's
yes.
Possible, but I it's just something I know nothing about. I can't answer the question. I'm sorry about that.
Okay. Okay, that's all right. Well, we have a few questions from the audience as well. One of them is that it seems that the Ethiopian Defense Force is losing the war in Tigray. Similarly, other forces are losing too. Now that the TDF is getting the upper hand, what do you think will be the way forward and the chance of Ethiopia being united as one country?
Well, that is the great question, and it is the most difficult question that you can possibly pose at this moment. I mean, it was fascinating. The U.S. Institute of Peace, which brings together a lot of people of really high caliber, including a number of former, effectively, Africa ministers for they're called Assistant Secretaries of State for Africa, in the United States. I think it was the day after the war broke out, said that there was a threat to the collapse of Ethiopia as a state by this war, that it could tear the whole of Ethiopia apart. I mean, let me just give you one specific example. If this war continues, and I don't know whether it will or won't, I mean, you can't predict the future, But if it did continue, and if there isn't a resolution, then the real question is surely this. What about people like the Somalis? The Somalis have for years yearned for independence from Ethiopia in the Ogaden. Will they not perhaps push for independence? I don't know. Will they be prepared to sacrifice their children to go and fight in the hills and mountains of Tigray, which is hundreds, perhaps thousands of miles away from where they live? Why should they? So, all the kind of forces inside of Ethiopia, which have been burning for years, could be really a problem. And you can't, once you unleash your war, you just don't know where it's going to end.
And from your experience of the Eritrean, of the Eritrean regime and Eritrea itself, how damaging do you think is the fact that they lost the war in Tigray for the sustainability of the Eritrean regime going forward? Can President Assad survive this?
There's a good question. I hate talking about the future. I know little about the present and not much about the past, but, it's so difficult to predict these things. I think that he's in a really difficult position. Don't forget there have been, and we know this for a fact, at least 3 attempts on his life. And there was one attempt, I think it was in 2013, when sections of the military actually drove into the capital Asmara and tried to overthrow the president. They were foiled at the last moment. So, he isn't universally popular by any means. And, would an army that is dissatisfied, that has failed on the battlefield, would they turn on him? It's possible. The thing is that President Isaias has been extremely clever in the way that he has manipulated the army down the years. He has moved generals from one position to another position. He's put rivals against each other for years and years. And it's a long, slow process. He may well manage to survive. I can't predict it. And, unless you are right inside the senior ranks of the Eritrean military, which I certainly am not, then you can't know. But he's certainly going to be up against a lot of problems in the wake of this defeat. That's for sure.
On the basis of the issues in Tigray, Oromo,
Benishangul Gumuz, yes.
And the Somalian region, is there any possibility of withering away of ethnic-based regional states from the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia?
That really is one of the issues that has been around now ever since the Tigrayans brought in ethnic federalism. Was that when they arrived in 1991 and took control of Addis Ababa, they ran a state which was, how can I put it, which was a unitarian state. And they basically said, look, every region has the right, every ethnicity has the right to run their own affairs and to including having independence if they ask for it. Although, let's be honest, but behind the scenes, the Tigrayans also set up front organizations which then controlled those regional states. So it wasn't quite the regional organization that it appeared to be. Over a period of time between 1991 and the present, all of those regional states and regional parties then began to grow and became powerful organizations in themselves. And, in a sense, Prime Minister Abiy is the result of that, because he is the first from an Oromo background who has ever been the leader of Ethiopia in its long and very splendid history. he's the first person to actually control it from that background. Now, the other thing that people forget is that when he came to power, he tried to pull the power back from towards the center, and a lot of the states who were powerful because they had this regional power began to resist. And let's not forget there were more than 1 million people displaced by fighting and conflict in Ethiopia even before the war in Tigray. And many of them were in places like Benishangul and the Afar region, the Somali region, and the Oroma region. All of these regions have had these ethnic tensions because, everybody began to say, well, why am I being ruled by the guy on the other side of the hill? That hill used to belong to us. My ancestors used to plow it. It was our forefathers had it. And so they asserted themselves. And you've got all these clashes and these conflicts. Where is this all going? As I say, I don't know the future. But these are the kind of questions that the people of the Horn of Africa have to answer themselves. It's not for outsiders to answer.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And there's another question that just came in from the audience. How do you see the chances for a political transition after Isaiah's death?
Yes, well, he is not immortal, as are none of us. So sure as hell he will die, as we all will. So there will be a transition. He's been grooming his son to take over, a pretty familiar pattern in Africa. Will that happen? I don't know. I mean, he first got to get there. It also depends on the circumstances in which he dies. If President Isaias is assassinated, and that's not something I'm asking for. I'm just saying if he was assassinated and there was a coup or something like that, it would be one set of circumstances. If he dies peacefully in his bed, which is certainly possible, then that's another set of circumstances. Unfortunately, the only organization that is really a functional organization that is separate from Isaias and the party he brought up are the religious organizations, the church and the mosques. And they are the only people who really give guidance in such a circumstance that wasn't just a party guidance. Will that happen? Who knows?
And do you think it would be possible to know who killed Seyum, the former foreign minister? That's also a question from the audience.
I wish I could answer that. I mean, it was pretty clear that he was assassinated by by the Ethiopian military when they took him captive. But how, I don't know. Okay, are we just about done?
Well, just the last one. How do you foresee the future of the Horn of Africa?
I don't have a crystal ball. I wish them well. I think it's going to be a damn tough time ahead. That's really all I can say. I love the people of the Horn of Africa as I love Africans as a whole. But, they've got a really tough time ahead.
Mm-hmm.
So, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mariam Basajja, for conducting this interview. And we'd like to appreciate journalist and author Martin Plaut. Martin has written this very important book. I've had a chance to look through it. It's Understanding Eritrea, Inside Africa's Most Repressive State. Thank you very much, Martin. We really appreciate your sharing the facts about Eritrea and what needs to be done.